BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Alright, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. I would like to remind everybody that on the channel this year I've been doing a regular segment about the New Orleans Axeman that comes out on Wednesdays. It is an unidentified serial killer mystery from the early part of the 20th century, and a lot of the general public's understanding of the Axeman case came from a popularized narrative that was put forward in the book Ready to Hang by Robert Talon, but the full title is Ready to Hang 7 Famous New Orleans Murders, and I was quite curious about some of the other stories in his book, and again, just starting with Chapter 1, I had read the Axeman chapter, and I talked about it on the Wednesday segment, which I invite you to like and subscribe to, as well as download the show for free at LaunchPad 1, but I wanted to know, what else is he putting into his book? What did he put into his book, which again was published in 1952, mind you? And I decided to read the chapter called Murder in Basin Street. It's spelled B-A-S-I-N. The young French speaker in me wants to say Basin, but the West Virginian in me is just going to say Basin Street. And today we are going back to 1883 to talk about a crime that truly, truly surprised me. It really surprised me how gripping this story was when I was reading Ready to Hang by Robert Talon, because the Murder in Basin Street deals with the story of Mr. Toiville Sykes and the murder of Kate Townsend, and it is a whodunit case, it's a motive case, it is something that deals with the story of someone's true identity. There are a lot of elements in here that are really just perplexing and thought-provoking, but at the same time, there are also cultural elements that were very surprising, and some of them were not super surprising, but just saddening to hear the way that the culture happened at the time. And before I truly begin, I would like to remind you guys that if you would like to support any of these efforts, such as the multi-part discussions that are available on this channel, as well as some of the more extensive book discussions, and perhaps even things related to the technical aspects of this show, you can support Black Box Online Radio by going over to BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88. There's a link to that in the description box that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anyone who makes a contribution will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. I would like to read something from the book Ready to Hang by Robert Talon, A Murder in Basin Street. Upstairs, Dr. Vesey and Officer Clark found Sykes waiting. Dr. Lewis had dressed his wounds, a deep gash on the inner thigh, and some scratches on his chest, and helped him into fresh clothing. In one corner of the small room, off a gallery, lay his black ink. In one corner of the small room, he had his trousers, and in the other, one leg was slashed and stained with blood, and ripped and torn on his undershirt, and a pair of drawers cut in half, also covered with blood. Sykes turned to Clark and said, "I'm going to give myself up. I had to do it." On the way downstairs, he added, "She drew the knife on me and I took it away. Then she drew the scissors on me, and I cut her. A reporter from the Daily Picayune arriving as Sykes reached the lower hall attempted to question him, but the man seemed incapable of speech. For a moment his eyes were wandering restlessly until they reached the door of the room wherein lay his slaughtered paramour, and then he said, "Don't press me to answer, I'll tell you some other time." And to provide some context, Kate Townsend is murdered in a boarding house, according to this narrative, and by boarding house there's an insinuation that these are some ladies of the night, and two of the other people who live there are named Rosa Garcia and Molly Johnson, and the testimony of Molly Johnson will be very important in this story. But it's also very crucial to remember, or to share with you guys, that Kate Townsend and Flavel Sykes were involved in a romantic relationship that went on for several years. And not only was there some type of connection between them for the long term, but also that Kate Townsend could not read or write. And this story talks about how things were not extremely well documented in 1883, and a lot of people didn't even know Kate Townsend's true origin, and it's quite possible that Kate Townsend wasn't even her real name. But she had told at least one person that she was Irish, and not just of Irish descent, but actually from Ireland, and first made her way to Liverpool in England, and then to the United States of America. And only sometimes it appears that she is talking in an Irish accent. So I think the reader is left with something, well, is that true or false? And that is just pure trivia in relation to the story. The point is that these things are not super well documented, but this is the major point that I think is absolutely vital, and that is that Flavel Sykes says that he was attacked by the woman, that he was attacked by Kate Townsend. First she came at him with a knife, and then she came at him with a pair of scissors, which we'll see very early on is actually going to be a pair of pruning shears. I'd like to read the exact quotation for you. Soon afterwards another blood-stained weapon was exhibited. It was a pair of pruning shears, doubtless the weapon referred to by Sykes when he spoke of the scissors. I'd like to look at another segment here that is jumping ahead in the story, but firstly, the newspaper at the time, the Daily Picayune, refers to Toisville Sykes as a man from an aristocratic family who became an outcast when he joined his fortunes with those of Kate Townsend. And because Kate could not read or write, Toisville Sykes was carrying out all of her business affairs, like all of her necessary errands. He was responsible for that, so it's a little bit more than just someone she was seeing regularly. It seems like they had a very well-established relationship over several years. But the perhaps most morbid and maybe even grotesque parts of the book are on pages 12 and 13, which is roughly the middle section of the story, A Murder in Basin Street, where it says, "A sheet covered Miss Kate's face. It could not conceal the red stains on the white counterpanes, sheets, and mattress. The bare feet were standing on the floor dipped in a pool of blood, which darkened the crimson hue which prevailed in the pattern of the carpet. When the sheet was lifted, however, the deed in all its shocking reality was revealed. The morning the Daily Picayune had described the room as thus. In the left-hand corner was a magnificent étagère, upon which statuettes, the work of a renowned artist, and small articles of verdure, betraying great taste in both selection and arrangement, were placed. A finely carved, though small table stood next, while adjoining this with a splendid glass door armoire, on the shelves of which were stored, next to a plethora of the finest linen, and with Coroner Lemonnier at the autopsy, and his assistant, and Dr. Auchenard, a jury of 5 men, reporters in 3 leading New Orleans newspapers, the representative of the Times Democrat, Charles Donneau, and Sergeant Grabert, had found the bowie knife and pruning shears, and they were not allowed to print the story. The next day a small paragraph in the paper stated that the editor feels that the details of the slaying of the infamous Kate Townsend by her paramour Sykes are so nauseating as to preclude their presentation to the public. The other editors were less squeamish. Their accounts told all. It took 8 men to lift the body and place it on a table in the room. There were 11 wounds, 3 of which were fatal. The jury decided upon a verdict of death from hemorrhage, the result of deep punctures to the lung, heart, and large blood vessels. The doctors had to cut through 6 inches of fat during the autopsy. It was a sight to make the strongest men shudder. You heard the defense that Twavel Sykes is saying that she attacked him and he simply retaliated. Well, one point that immediately came to mind for me was how on earth would she be able to experience such horrendous injuries to the point where it's going to make most men shudder in just disgust and fear and just be overwhelmed with some type of morbid misery if she attacked him and he simply took the weapon from her and responded. I mean, wouldn't there be fewer injuries to her? And one point that Twavel Sykes is going to use is that he's simply going to say that he blacked out. He didn't remember what happened. And because I've talked about several true crime cases on the channel with you guys, that is something that people do say in these moments. But one interesting fact about that is, and it's not exactly a fact, it's more just like a general understanding of humanity, sometimes people do not tell the truth. Because sometimes people will say that they blacked out and they didn't know what they were doing. Other times people will say that they were sleepwalking. But it is frequently reported that when people are committing crimes such as a stabbing, or even acts of stabbing, because again, Twavel Sykes isn't saying that he is guilty, they report blacking out. Not to go off on some giant side story, but there was a teenager who claimed that he was sleepwalking. He said he went to bed and then he had woken up and found that he had shot both of his parents, and he was on the 911 call crying and freaking out. But they determined that he was guilty because they said that if he had truly been sleepwalking, the first gunshot would have awakened him. I mean, some people are tough sleepwalkers, but they can't sleep through a gunshot, and that he wouldn't have been able to fire multiple shots at multiple people successfully, so they determined that he wasn't telling the truth. The reason why I'm sharing that with you is because it illustrates the point of how the blackout defense isn't always credible. And you really have to wonder, these people have some type of relationship, and if anything, from the narrative that Robert Talon has created here in A Murder in Basin Street, it shows that perhaps there actually was some genuine problem between Twavel Sykes and Kate Townsend, and the descriptions of Kate Townsend in the story are of someone who is abrasive, somewhat aggressive, and she definitely doesn't seem like she is the easiest partner for him to get along with, but that 100%, 110% does not justify murder or even to have her killed in the way that is talked about. I mean, barring some type of extreme self-defense case. But I will not talk about self-defense just yet because there is something that I think is a little bit more important to the story, is the way in which the crime was committed. Now, very clearly, Twavel Sykes has said that she came at him with a knife, a Bowie knife specifically, and then came at him with a pair of scissors. We read that all together and heard it all here, clear as day. On page 21 it states that Dr. Lemonnier was the first witness summoned by the state. He described in detail the position of the body when he had first viewed it and the sort of weapon that in his opinion had been used to inflict the wounds. When he was shown the Bowie knife found on the premises of the murdered woman and asked if such a weapon might have been used, he replied in the affirmative. He was then asked, and then shown an ordinary kitchen knife with the same question. His answer was in the negative. So, does that mean that it wasn't true that Kate Townsend first came at Twavel Sykes with a Bowie knife, and then he is maybe able to block or defend himself in some way, and then she comes at him again with the scissors, or they're actually a pair of pruning shears? Does that mean some way, somehow, that his story is incorrect? Because, I mean, did he fight her off and then reach for the knife? And it's really quite hard when his whole story is that he blacked out. But that definitely suggests to me that there is some form of aggression on his part. So, and another detail is Police Sergeant Grabber, the next witness, told of being summoned to number 40 Basin Street and seeing Kate Townsend's body stretched across the bed, with the small of the back on the edge of the bed and the feet on the carpet. He also described the bloody linen in the armoire and asserted that a mirror in the room had been broken. He and Mr. Donneau had searched together for a weapon and found the bowie knife and the pruning shears in the alley outside the window of Kate Townsend's bedroom. Both instruments had been blood-stained. Under cross-examination by Mr. Enriques of the defense, Grabert admitted that there had been no overturned furniture or any signs of a struggle. He did not recall seeing blood anywhere, except on the linen in the armoire and upon the body. Well, what on earth is that? I mean, and also that's something that's extremely fishy about the story of Troisville Sykes, because, again, his stance, his claim is that she attacked him and he had to respond. And notice that I'm not saying the word defend himself too frequently, but he had to respond like he just retaliated. I mean, the overall defense is she attacked him and he blacked out, and then once he was able to regain his conscious awareness, she was dead in this rather gruesome way, and that the bowie knife and the pruning shears were both used. And even if, let's just say, in this perhaps rather oddly documented story from the 1800s with no electronic sources, even if that's true, well, why are there no signs of a struggle? If he had just blacked out and wasn't even aware of what he was doing, there's no sign of something being turned over. The furniture isn't all thrown about. You would think if a fight is going on and that she attacks him in a rage, there isn't a single thing that's been knocked over. Anything's possible, but that is a second point that is very fishy about his story. And because I don't want you guys to wait anymore, I'm going to jump to the perhaps most shocking point of the story, and that is that Troisville Sykes is not entering a plea of self-defense. He's not saying not guilty by reason of self-defense. No, he is simply saying not guilty. Even states on page 30 that there was so little of a justification for a plea of self-defense. And, I mean, I was just truly shocked about that it's almost, there are even lines in here that talk about how Sykes came up with the legal response that it was just, necessary for him to respond in that way. And there's also a very large amount of the story that I haven't been discussing with you guys until this point, because, not gonna lie, my eyes kind of glossed over a little bit. They're just going on and on about how Kate Townsend owned this object and it was worth $5,000, and she owned this object and it was worth $10,000. The $5,000 was actually some of her jewelry, and they're going on, and they're trying to show that Troisville Sykes and Kate Townsend had this relationship, and he most likely orchestrated and planned and committed a premeditated murder because he thought he was about to lose his estate and there was some type of monetary gain involved. And in short, it's over money, financial disputes. And I also mentioned that there's that other woman named Molly who lived in the house, and Molly would testify that on numerous times Kate was the one who was threatening Troisville Sykes. Again, no justification for his behavior, but it seems like there is pressure that is brewing. But because I'm not making you wait, to look at page 31, at 10:40 the next morning, the jury brought in a verdict of not guilty. Troisville Sykes departed at once with his attorneys. In the corridors, friends greeted him and shook his hand. The decision of the jury had not come quickly. The first vote had been 8 for manslaughter and only 4 for acquittal. Yet during the night the 4 had brought the 8 to their way of thinking. One of the jurymen is reported to have remarked, "A great many people are going to be sore. Some were lenient, applauded the release of Sykes, but others were sore. Perhaps most of them did not believe that he had made the first attack upon Kate Townsend, but the immoral characters of persons involved outraged many, and it seemed that Sykes, a disreputable person, was going to escape all punishment, and to profit by what they referred to in 1884 is the time of the trial, as his ill-gotten gain. The Daily Picayune was so indignant that on February 3rd it editorialized at great length by saying, "The pimp of an abandoned woman slazer opens her succession in his own favor because the court can try the charge against him. He is acquitted and enters the enjoyment of ill-gotten gains, and there is no power in Christendom to say him nay. Cool, calm, and collected, he says, I slew this woman because I was obliged to, and I can claim the accumulation of her lust. The case is so revolting that it is difficult without indelicacy to enter into its details. Only human nature surging toward its last residuum of degradation can realize the status in which Sykes presented to his countrymen. He admits that he killed the woman. He acknowledges he took from her hands the knife which did the fatal deed. Was he then obliged to kill her? No. He only says that he forgot himself, meaning that he blacked out, and that he remembers no more until the fond supporter of his miserable existence lay dead and bleeding from 11 speechless wounds. And there is an exclamation point at the end of that one for a good reason. Nobody remembers any more. The man is free and rich. Good men, brave men, and pure men have said that that is just. We leave him to the remnants of his conscience, but we lay our protest at the doors of society. In this case we shall blame the jury, the law, the officers of the law. We could, but we could also blame Sykes, because he was tried by at least a jury of average intelligence, and so it is supposed that some or more of his friends were in the box, but the verdict was unanimous, and the fact that hushes everything at the outset. The sad truth is that our people do not hush at the outset, but they appreciate the sacredness of life, and we are not prepared to draw upon the dead line between self-defense and murder. Sooner or later they will get it written in the blood of their sons, in the desecration of their household altars. And I think that is very telling. As I said, I think that it's genuinely a cultural element of the time, where it shows that the story of the woman is immediately being devalued, and they're trying to destroy her reputation and her credibility, even though she is dead. And as someone who is just reading this story, I am so immediately torn, because I don't want to call Kate Townsend the aggressor. She's been murdered. I don't want to call her the one who is untruthful, but it appears that perhaps she was a very aggressive person, and that Twalville Sykes was panicking in some way. Now, was this a cold and calculated murder? I have no idea. Was it actually a form of self-defense, or, as they say, he was just obliged to do it? Oof. I don't, I mean, that was just, like, so shocking that he was not going to enter the plea of self-defense, but he was just obliged to respond in this way. And I can only gather that they're saying something to the effect of, if he wasn't aware of his mental faculties at the time, then it wouldn't necessarily be self-defense. It would be not guilty by a different reason, maybe some type of mental defect issue. But more or less, they are very, very much coinciding on the same strain. And if anybody has any comments, they can put their ideas in the comments section down below. But what do you make of those details about how they're in this heated altercation, yet there's no furniture turned over? They are in a dispute where she comes at him first with the Bowie knife, then with the pruning shears. Yet the Bowie knife seems like to be one that was used. It seems like if it were genuine, either self-defense or obliged retaliation, I hate to use that term, then she would have been stabbed only with the pruning shears if he were able to get a hold of that. But again, he blacked out, and in his story, so anything could have happened. And I'm gonna address the elephant in the room. Is that just a convenient lie? Oh yeah, well everything that could exonerate me I remember, but everything I did that was illegal I don't remember. And I mean, it's possible that he could be telling the truth, or he could be an absolute liar. But according to this story, presented and ready to hang by Robert Talon, Toiville Sykes was found not guilty and was not convicted for the murder of Kate Townsend. But another interesting detail about this one is, as I said, Kate Townsend was reported to have been from Ireland, only speaking in the Irish accent sometimes. I guess it was something that she could perhaps lose over time. First she goes to Liverpool and then to the United States. But she had a tattoo on her arm that said A Pim, A. Pimm, and some people thought that perhaps that was her real name, that she wasn't even really named Kate Townsend, or, I mean, really, this could be reworked into a rather fascinating mystery if it were to be picked up by fiction writers. And I don't think that people should purely exploit the death of someone for their own personal gain, so it would have to be done in a very respectful way. But there's certain elements of the story that could really take shape into a fascinating mystery because all of these clues are left behind, and the records in 1883 and 1884 are not very clear. But on that note, this book here, Ready to Hang: Seven Famous New Orleans Murders, is the subject of a lot of criticism because Robert Talon is someone who has been more or less accused of blending in fictitious elements, the hard facts. And I truly wanted to just respond to his story of the Basin Street murder because I was curious about his ideas, his presentation, and I'm just reading the book and discussing the content in the book. But it's not to say that everything in this narrative is completely 100% authentic. If you were to pick up Ready to Hang and you're reading the book, you're going to follow along and you're going to be like, wow, this is just straight out of history. That's the way it's presented. In 1883, this happened. In 1884, this happened. These are the people living in the house. These are the events that took place in the house. Number one, it's a recreation. Number two, there are no citations in the book, like no footnotes or in-text citations. He does say very clearly that he is using newspaper articles as the source of his material, such as the Times-Picayune, as well as some of the other coverage that was cited. But we can always understand, accept, and be aware of that some of these writers who are covering true crime cases from the 1800s may not have been able to recreate the situation with 100% accuracy. But what do you think about the narrative that has been shared about Kate Townsend and Toiville Sykes? Are you surprised that he was found not guilty, or do you think that he was just simply living in a time when the legal system favored the men, or the legal system favored elites, and that even though he was some type of aristocrat outcast, the aristocrat half of that was more prominent and more powerful? Share anything that you want in the comments section down below. And as I said, Robert Talon was someone who really popularized the narrative of the New Orleans Axeman, an unsolved serial killer case from Louisiana. And I invite you to check out my Wednesday show on the New Orleans Axeman, and it will be arranged into a playlist. You can listen through them straight, listen to them as standalone episodes. And it's not the first time that I've talked about the Axeman on the channel. Giving a shout out one more time to YouTube user Lolo, who said that she thought the Axeman story would be a good idea for October in the Halloween season, doing a multi-part series on the New Orleans Axeman. And simply, I invite you to listen to more episodes of Black Box Online Radio. Every Monday is Zodiac Monday, talking about the Zodiac Killer. Lots of episodes about the Phantom Killer and Jack the Ripper. So please share anything you want in the comment section down below. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And I will see you over on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.